We'll start with the province of Transylvania. Transylvania is now part of the Eastern European nation of Romania. Almost 500 years ago, though, in case you don't already know, it was a separate nation, and its king, John Sigismund, was the first and only Unitarian monarch in history. And in 1567, he issued the Edict of Torda, the first European law mandating religious freedom. So quite a few years ago, I traveled there to deliver a theological paper at an international symposium. And as anyone who travels much can tell you, events like this tend to be wonderful learning experiences. I visited historical sites that I had read about in divinity school. I met Unitarians and Universalists literally from all around the world. And one piece of unexpected enlightenment for me came with a lecture by Reverend Derek McCulloch from Christchurch, New Zealand. He presented a paper on how the Southern Hemisphere's seasons affect standard Christian holidays. And as background, outside the United States, most Unitarians and Universalists are Christian, and they practice a form of Christianity that's technically called Socinianism. And that's named after a scholar named Faustus Socinus, who was declared a heretic in the late 1500s. And even in the United States, such early Unitarians as William Ellery Channing and Presidents John Adams and John Quincy Adams were also technically Socinians. They believed in God, and they believed people had immortal souls, but they also believed that Jesus of Nazareth was not God. He was an ideal but mortal human being sent by God to teach us the right way to live. And he saved by example, not by dying on the cross for us. To Socinians, the crucifixion was a crime committed by powerful human beings. It was not a sacrifice demanded by a sadistic father god. For the record, from Transylvania to England to New England to New Zealand, that pretty well sums up Christian Unitarianism to this day. It's about living by the example of Jesus, not worshiping him as a divinity, which is just fine with me. Atheist though I am, I got along just fine with folks at that conference, and I greatly appreciated their insight on things. Unitarian and Universalist congregations in the Southern Hemisphere discovered something that got lost in translation, traveling from the North. When they first began to hold Easter and Christmas at the same time as we do in Europe and North America, those dates put Easter in autumn and Christmas at the beginning of summer. And the symbolism works out all wrong. At best, they come across as weak imitations of the real Easter and Christmas back in Europe. It felt similar to what we as Americans would feel by celebrating our Independence Day on November 5th, which is the United Kingdom's patriotic holiday, and maybe singing God Save the King. It just kind of washes out for, if you're not on the inside there. Fortunately, being Unitarians and Universalists, the congregation in Christchurch didn't feel obliged to follow any church calendar drawn up in London or Boston either. Unitarians and Universalists around the world may have diverse religious beliefs, but we all tend to be pretty independent-minded. So after several years of less than optimal Easters and Christmases, the New Zealanders moved Easter to September, October, which is when spring comes to New Zealand. And because Christmas is at its core a celebration of faith, hope, peace, and the return of light, the turning of the winter solstice, they moved Christmas to coincide with an indigenous Maori winter festival called Matariki at the end of June. Matariki is a celebration of the star cluster, the Pleiades, reappearing in the night sky above the horizon in the southern hemisphere. That signals that the days are about to start getting longer again. Now, I had never traveled to the southern hemisphere, so it hadn't occurred to me that Easter would need to be moved. But it made total sense once somebody explained it. And I can't think of a better illustration, even in our ultra-modern digital world, of the connection between our religious lives and the way the world around us still works. We can mold plastic, build self-driving cars, and eat all the processed food we want, but we're still inextricably tied to earthly processes that are older than humanity itself. And whether we notice it or not, this matters to the psycho-spiritual side of our natures. And I think it also begins to explain why, even in the US, we still celebrate traditional religious holidays, even when we're not traditionally religious. The religious timetable reflects life's timetable. William Shakespeare once wrote, quite poignantly, I think, quote, "What is man? That is, what is humanity, if the sole good and purchase of our time is but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more." And to me, that was a poetic way of saying that every person who's even the least bit thoughtful looks out over the sea or up at the trees and sky every now and then and wonders, what does my life mean in the really big picture? What am I here for? What makes a good life? What happens when I die? How does my life fit into this huge and mysterious universe? And it is the drive to make sense of such questions that lies at the core of every religion. Even to ask them is, in my book, a religious act. Even the most totally atheistic scientific mindset does not exempt someone from the great religious questions. As far as that goes, if there is one thing that science has taught us, it's that our universe is even larger and more mysterious than the ancients dreamed. Or to put it slightly differently, atheist that I am, suppose we are just purely physical beings in a purely material universe. Suppose we totally cease to exist when we die. Suppose all there ever will be is just matter and energy and the physical laws of the universe. That is still a religious statement. And it still begs a religious question. This is the important part. What am I going to do about it? How is that going to guide my life as I move through the world? Or at the other extreme, suppose we do believe in a God who loves us, plans our lives, and prepares a home for our eternal soul once we die. That is more traditional, but it begs the exact same question. How should that belief guide my life? In other words, how, in my view, to the thoughtful person, religious non-belief and religious belief are equally religious. Just saying. But where I'm going with this, for one thing, is that we ought not to get so caught up with the first question, what I do or don't believe, that we lose sight of the really important question. What am I going to do about it? How should that belief or non-belief guide my relationships with real people in the real world here and now? How do we fit our lives into this huge and awesome universe in such a way that when we do die, we can say to ourselves, I did live the best life I could, given the information and conditions I had? Christian, atheist, Buddhist, Taoist, or pagan, moment by moment, how do I behave faithfully according to the best faith or sense of reality I can come up with in this moment? I live in the hills west of Brown County, just north of Lake Monroe, and sometimes, particularly when I'm working on a sermon, I take a break from writing and I putter around in the yard while I let all those big questions rattle around in my brain. And that's what I was doing a couple of weeks ago, yanking the tops off some early lawn weeds on a gorgeous sunny spring day, when a noise made me look, and to my surprise, two large cottontail rabbits jetted past me, so close I could practically have touched them. They were so intent on their pursuit of one another, I don't think they even noticed me, other than to steer around me. And I couldn't help laughing and saying to myself, well, golly, I wonder what's on their minds. Of course, Easter was a couple of weeks ago, but Easter symbolism is all around us right now. Rabbits are chasing one another, birds, insects, they're chasing one another, nests are being built, eggs are being laid in trees and shrubs and riverbanks. Redbud trees are in glorious bloom, and dogwoods too. Leaves are unfurling. Whether you call it Easter, Passover, Buddha's birthday, Ostara, Ramadan, our human religious festivals right now all reflect and connect with this rich cycle of life, of which each one of us is a tiny but wonderful part. At the same time, let us not get too romantic. All that rebirth and renewal are a lot of work, and they come at a price for the living beings who are doing it. It takes a lot of energy for trees and shrubs to make seeds, or for seeds to germinate, or for new plants to poke out of the ground. Making nests and laying eggs is hard work. On the human side of things, farmers have to get ready for plowing and planting. They're burning off the dead borders and drainage ditches. I've been out trimming broken and dead limbs from trees in our yard. As poet T.S. Eliot puts it, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilies out of the dead land. And Eliot was onto something. Those dead leaves raked into the borders, and those dead, rotten branches where bugs burrow to be hauled out and gobbled down by woodpeckers and other birds, they have work to do as well. So let's not get too sentimental about spring. I take walks along the roads out where I live. It is exciting to the eyes this time of year, but along with the new leaves and blossoms and bees and birds and rabbits, I can't help but notice there's just about as much death out there as there is life. Dead leaves, dead weeds, dead shrubs from last year, mounds of those dead leaves providing life and shelter for those newly hatched insects. Particularly if my walk takes me out on Highway 46 between Columbus and Bloomington, a lot of dead animals of all shapes and sizes. They've been out moving around with spring and cars hit them. Crows and buzzards are having a field day in the hills of southern Indiana right now, and frankly, flies and maggots will take care of whatever they leave behind. So, life and the processes that form life are a very mixed bag. Life cannot survive without death. We all eat something. As one of my favorite theologians, essayist, and poet Annie Dillard has put it, life itself is no more than one big chomp. Close quote. The Western religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have handed down a pretty straightforward view of the cosmos Eternity for them has a specific beginning point, and it's headed for a specific ending point. And we human beings are officially at the top of the food chain. The book of Genesis, which is revered by Jew, Christian, and Muslim alike, puts it, God blessed the first human beings and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over fish of the sea and birds of the air and every other living creature and every plant on the whole earth. Close quote. And interpretations of the Bible over the last 2,000 years all tend to agree on that point, that the cosmos was put here just for us. And I'm a little skeptical about that. To me, our relationship with the world is not that simple. If you're locked in a closed room with a few lowly mosquitoes, or heaven forbid, a few ticks, I can promise you they don't think you're at the top of the food chain. You're just a meal. They haven't read Genesis. And if there's one thing we ought to have learned over the last generation or two, it's that the earth and the creatures in it are unpredictable servants at best. And what's more, just to go back to the Unitarians in Christchurch, New Zealand, having to move Easter to October is just one tiny example how life's surprises are larger than traditional Western theology. From atmosphere-changing volcanoes in the Western Pacific to the latest outbreak of tornadoes right here in Indiana, nature's whims are a lot larger than churches, and they're larger than corporations as well. The universe is alive with new discoveries. If we're open to them, they keep right on amazing us. Our religious sentiment prompts us to ask the questions, but no religion has been all that successful in dictating all the answers, at least not until we find new ones through genuine research and an open mind. In other words, spring religious celebrations may be a wonderful way to express the exuberance this season brings to our hearts, but we still need to adjust to the world and the universe. They are not going to adjust to us. We need to stay honest. As a species, we need to keep reflecting and investigating, and sometimes reality does ask us to refine our religion and the ritual and the very way we live. If we use our religion as an excuse to refuse to adjust as we learn new things, we're losing touch with the real purpose for religion, in my view. It gets too easy to worship the form and structure of the religion while we lose track of the real meaning and purpose of what religion is supposed to do for us. I once read a religious publication, I won't specify the tradition, that because God plans to end the world before we can make it uninhabitable, we don't need to worry about pollution, clean water, or unwise use of resources. Now, for the record, that editorial was written about the time of the first Earth Day, more than 50 years ago. And we're now beginning, if we're paying attention, to see what a cop-out that attitude was, how life-emptying and life-harming it is in the long run. And that sort of thing always does beg the question, what are people, among other things, what are people 50 years from now going to be saying about us? And to me, real religious feeling calls us to dance with our evolving, changing sense of wonder, mystery, surprise, and also the horror and challenge all around us. And I think spring and Earth Day are a fine time to reflect that in this age of ever more powerful technology, we best serve ourselves and our survival as a species, not by being possessive with the world around us, but by partnering with the world around us. I'm for treating Mother Nature with care, kindness, and a lot of respect. She feeds and houses us, but she has a long history of killing the careless. The first Earth Day took place 53 years ago yesterday, and it was organized by, of all people, Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin. For the record, Gaylord Nelson was also a noted advocate for business. He chaired the Senate Small Business Committee. That was in the years before it became a mantra that you could not advocate for clean air and water and responsible use of resources and still make money. I think we need a new mantra. It's not an either-or question. It's a question of foresight and ingenuity. Because one thing the sciences have added to the conversation that no one was thinking about when those verses in Genesis were written is the concept of time. Before the unimaginable age that we now know this planet is, let alone this cosmos, all of human history is nothing. The 2 centuries of the Industrial Revolution is a tiny fraction of nothing. So, by what kind of madness could we possibly think that we might continue to extract, burn, pollute, and spew, even at the same rate, let alone increasing rates, into the cosmic time frame of our descendants' lives and their descendants? So, on this refulgent Earth Day weekend and every weekend, let us reflect on the wonder, mystery, and renewal of life. The Earth will continue to renew itself for the next 2 or 3 billion years, with or without us. Let us reflect also on how our religion can best serve us and how we can best serve ourselves and one another on into that vast future. May we conduct ourselves so that the immensity of time and space are wonders to be prized by our distant descendants rather than agents of their demise. Amen. May it be so.